Welcome to The Explainer. So, here's a thought. What if the American dream didn't just fade away on its own? What if it was deliberately taken apart piece by piece? Today, we're diving into Noam Chomsky's really powerful argument about wealth, power, and inequality, all based on his work Requiem for the American Dream. Now, Chomsky, who actually lived through the Great Depression, starts us off with this really stark contrast. He remembers a time when, things were objectively way worse for most people, but there was this feeling of hope in the air, a real belief that things were gonna get better. He says that today, for so many, that hope is just gone, replaced by a sense of despair.
And that begs the huge question that drives his whole analysis, right? What on earth happened? What broke the promise of America so badly that our whole national mood flipped from hope to hopelessness?
To get to the bottom of that, Chomsky first has us really look at the core promise itself, the dream that he says has basically just vanished.
You know the one I'm talking about. For generations, the deal was pretty simple. You work hard, you can get ahead. You could land a decent job, buy a house, give your kids a better life. But Chomsky's point is that this fundamental social contract, it's been shattered. For millions of people, that path just isn't there anymore.
So what broke it? Well, Chomsky points a finger at one main culprit, a crazy, unprecedented concentration of wealth. And we're not just talking about the top 1%. He says it's driven by an even smaller elite, literally the top 1/10 of 1%, who have managed to capture a truly staggering chunk of the nation's wealth.
And here's the kicker. Chomsky argues this was no accident. It's the result of a deliberate and self-fueling cycle.
This right here is the engine that drives that inequality. It kicks off with wealth pooling at the very, very top. That money is then used to buy political power. Think lobbying, campaign donations, you name it. That power is then used to write the rules, to pass policies like tax cuts and deregulation that, surprise, surprise, benefit the wealthy. And what does that do? It concentrates even more wealth at the top. And the cycle just keeps repeating, getting stronger every single time.
You know what's wild, though? This isn't some new radical idea. Chomsky points out that Adam Smith, the father of modern capitalism, warned us about this exact thing way back in 1776. He said the masters of mankind, who today would be our big financial institutions and multinational corporations, will always rig the system for themselves. This whole dilemma goes back to the very start of political philosophy. You had Aristotle, who saw that huge inequality was a major threat to a real democracy, and his solution was simple: reduce the inequality. But then you have James Madison, one of America's founders, who saw the same problem but had the exact opposite take: reduce democracy to protect the wealthy few from the many. Chomsky argues that for the last few decades, America has been going full speed down Madison's path.
Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty. What are the modern-day tools, the principles, as Chomsky calls them, that have been used to crank this cycle into overdrive?
He takes us back to the 1960s as a major turning point. This was a time of incredible social progress and activism. You had all these groups that had been pretty quiet before, women, minorities, young people, suddenly organizing and demanding a voice. It was this massive democratizing wave.
And you can bet the people in power were terrified by this. What came next was a huge, coordinated pushback from both the right and, interestingly, the liberal establishment. You had the famous Powell Memo calling for an all-out business offensive to take back control, and you had the Trilateral Commission, a group of liberal internationalists, literally warning of an excess of democracy, their way of saying the public was getting a little too involved for their comfort.
A massive part of this pushback was to basically rewire the entire economy. Chomsky highlights this huge shift called financialization. And what that really means is that our economy stopped focusing on actually making things, cars, steel, stuff you can touch, and started focusing on making money from money through risky speculation and complicated financial games. And the scale of this change is just mind-blowing. Get this. By 2007, right before the big financial crash, the financial industry was scooping up 40% of all corporate profits. 40%. In the 1950s, when we had a production-based economy, that number was tiny by comparison.
And of course, this shift, along with sending jobs overseas, had a real devastating impact on people. It created what a lot of people now call the precariat, this huge class of people living in a constant state of uncertainty. And Chomsky points out that for policymakers like Alan Greenspan, this greater worker insecurity wasn't a problem to be solved, it was a feature. It was a tool to keep wages low and workers in line.
This economic attack also powered an attack on something deeper, something more fundamental, the very idea of solidarity. Solidarity is a pretty simple concept, right?
It's just that gut feeling that we should care about and support each other.
Chomsky argues that systems built on that idea are seen as a threat by the powerful. Think about Social Security or public schools. They're based on the notion that we're all in this together, that we have a responsibility to each other. He says that the nonstop attacks on these programs, trying to defund them, privatize them, it's a deliberate effort to break those social bonds and push an ideology where it's every person for themselves.
So, wow, that's a pretty grim picture, right? With all these powerful forces at work, does Chomsky's analysis offer any kind of hope? Well, it does. And he points to a very clear, historical counterforce.
And here is the absolute key. Throughout American history, the one thing, the only thing, that has ever successfully pushed back against this concentration of wealth and power is organized people. Labor unions, civil rights activists, all these popular movements, they're the reason we have many of the rights and freedoms we take for granted today.
This idea is just so perfectly captured by a quote from Chomsky's friend, the historian Howard Zinn. He basically argued that big historical changes don't just magically appear. They are built on the foundation of countless small, brave acts by ordinary, often anonymous people on the ground.
And that brings us right back to today, doesn't it? It leaves us with this massive, vital question. Chomsky basically lays out this epic tug-of-war that has defined history. On one side, you have that vicious cycle of concentrated wealth, and on the other, the democratizing force of popular movements. So his analysis forces us to ask, which of those forces is winning right now? And where does the power to shape our future really lie?